China says this, and the U.S. says this, and the U.S. needs this, and so on, because the U.S. is very divided itself. And my view is that Trump is the worst president in American history and the most dangerous president that we've had in American history. He certainly doesn't represent most Americans on anything. And the issue really on the tensions and the trade and so forth is that a lot of it is in the hands of very few people. Almost everything, I would say everything that Trump has done on trade or trade war with China or other actions on China have been by executive decree or emergency powers under U.S. law, not even by legislation. So they hardly have been debated publicly, understood publicly, or do they reflect in any broad and deep way any views of United States citizens on this. There probably aren't deep views among most of the citizenry because, unfortunately, issues like these are complex. They require historical knowledge. They require a lot of discussion and dialogue. It helps, of course, when we have personal relations and experience. It's been my pleasure and honor and education to visit China almost every year for dozens of years. My first trip was 40 years ago, and I've been coming many times a year for most years for the last 30 years. So it makes a big difference to have these contacts. And unfortunately, even though we live in a connected age, we don't have the personal contacts as much as we need for an interconnected world to have the depth of understanding, personal relations, sense of each other's perspectives and history. And therefore, views are easily manipulated on all sides, and they're subject to crazy ideas, propaganda, cultural memes, and in the U.S. context, to a absolutely terrible president in the last 4 years who's really a xenophobic, racist, and idiot, in my view. Sorry to use the language, but he's just not knowledgeable about almost anything. And because of that, we have really a dangerous situation. I think, and I hope, but nobody can be sure, that it will be less dangerous after the election on November 3rd, if the votes are counted properly and if we don't have some disorder in the United States. I'm counting on us having a new president and a chance for a fresh start on these issues. Not that things will be entirely easy, because the anti-China sentiment runs relatively high in elite mainstream media circles right now, partly because Trump makes it that way, partly, as you say, because there is a strain of American thinking that is conducive to this kind of idea. It's got two elements, I would say, that are conjoined historically. One is and you touched on it, a longstanding Protestant evangelical vision of America by U.S. People. And I apologize, people on the chat are saying don't use American because that means all of the Americas, but I have to use shorthand just for the English language. So excuse me to all my friends in the Americas, and especially in Latin America. I'm going to say America, but I mean the United States of America, just for shorthand. But there is a Protestant evangelical strain throughout American history that says this is a God-backed country, and it is the providential authority of Americans to spread out across the North American continent, and then later to have global leadership. And this is a cultural, even religious kind of view. And that has been linked to another deep idea of American foreign policy for the last 75 years, really 70 years, I would say. And that is the United States as the dominant world power, first fighting against Soviet communism in the way that it was expressed. You mentioned George Kennan and containment, and then for other purposes, but a deep American foreign policy idea that the U.S. should be the state with the dominant military power and economic power. And of course, China's rise has called that into question. And you put these two strains of thinking together, and it's created a lot of elite anxiety in the United States that, oh my God, there's a major challenge to American primacy. And because of the cultural, religious overtones that are added to this, one adds a lot of other adjectives about China to this discourse, and it gets fairly widespread play. And the tone against China has been, therefore, increasingly more and more negative during the Trump period. Now, Trump himself represents a particular political base of the evangelical white Protestant population, and the perfect exemplar of that is Pompeo, the Secretary of State, whom I regard as the worst Secretary of State we've ever had, of the worst president we've ever had. But Pompeo himself is an evangelical Protestant who surely believes and states the God-given backing of America, and he is on a crusade. And it's a very dangerous one. And he's traveling around Asia trying to mobilize support for U.S. hegemony or leadership or primacy or whatever term one wants. So this is a very particular political constellation that is the worst that we have to offer. Now, let me move beyond that, though, and just try to put the issues into what I hope is some broader and constructive perspective. We are, in my opinion, and I've been writing about this for many, many years, at the end of the American dominance period. And that is a certain kind of also mechanical implication, if you will, of the declining share of the U.S. in the world economy or in other dimensions of global economics, finance, geopolitics, technological leadership, and so forth. The U.S. really was dominant in many ways, politically, militarily, technologically in 1950, in ways that it is no longer today. And China's rise over the last 40 years is, of course, the most important geopolitical event that has changed this, but not the only one, because there have been many, many countries that have advanced tremendously in technological capacity and strongly in the Asia-Pacific region, especially in East Asia. So China's not the only country, but it's by far the biggest and most consequential of this sort. So we are geopolitically in a new era. It is an era in which no country can lead and no country should lead. It's an era where we need cooperation. As you said, we need multilateralism because no single country can be a dominant leader. And the idea at this stage of having blocks of countries is only profound, mistaken simplification to the complexities that we face right now. The idea of a new Cold War that divides two blocks of nations is a kind of insanity and an invitation to mutual destruction rather than to solving the problems that we face. So what do we need to do to achieve truly a multilateral, constructive approach? That, I think, is the most important challenge that we face in true foreign policy in the future. And I would say in this regard, it is, of course, partly the United States elite understanding that the days of the 1950s arguably are over. We need a very different kind of approach. We need to understand that unlike the historical episode where, with all complexity respected, the British Empire in a way was followed by the American Empire, this is not a situation in which the US empire will be followed by a China empire or by any other hegemonic power, but by a multilateral system under rules of the game that stop us from killing each other and enable us to cooperate on crucial areas such as fighting climate change or protecting biodiversity or ending poverty, or as we face in the current moment, fighting a devastating pandemic disease. So we have to understand first, what is it that we're moving towards? It's not a China-led world. It's not an America-led world. It must not be a two-block world that's insane. It needs to be a multilateral, rule-based world where we can gain the benefits of cooperation. And there, I think there's real work to do. It's not easy to do this. And as the two leading economies and the two most powerful countries, the United States and China, are going to need extra care and extra institutionalized connections with each other and more cultural and intellectual exchanges, just exactly as the one we're having right now, in order to get this right, because these issues are not simple and they are not at the core of our daily lives. And there are hardliners on all sides, and we need to talk down the hardliners in the United States and vote them out of office. But similarly, in China and elsewhere, hardline nationalist views would be devastating in a period when we need a multilateral understanding. So what is it going to take on multilateralism? First, the world has agreed in a fragile way, but it has agreed to certain basic approaches for the future, most importantly, sustainable development. That's embodied in the Sustainable Development Goals adopted in September 2015 and in the Paris Climate Agreement adopted at the end of 2015. The most important practical step for multilateralism is that we follow through on things that we have agreed, because the world unanimously, by that I mean all 193 UN member states, agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and the Paris Climate Agreement because we need those agreements. Similarly, the world agreed to the Convention on Biological Diversity because we're destroying biodiversity. So what we need is a global politics of seriousness to address the challenges that we have realized are so significant that even all governments agreed to do something about them. But I can note that there is a lack of serious follow-through in general to commitments that we've made, and all of our countries fall short on that. Now, Importantly, President Xi at the UN General Assembly in September made a very, very consequential announcement when he said that China is committed to reaching net zero emissions on carbon by 2060. This is a great breakthrough. And Europe previously had made an even bolder commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. When President Biden is in office, I count on him to make a similar commitment to net zero emissions of the United States by 2050. Then I think we need a deep institutionalization of this so that China, Europe, the US, and other countries work together seriously with real professional engineering studies, real detailed plans, not just tweets. And God forbid, if we could just get presidents to stop tweeting, this would be the first advance of multilateralism and international relations. Twitter is awful in this regard. One should never do foreign policy by Twitter. It's insane to try to put complex issues into 140 characters, and it could blow up the world by misunderstandings. So we need to institutionalize the fight against climate change, human-induced climate change. Similarly, China will host COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity this coming year in Kunming. This should be a breakthrough to save biodiversity from human destruction. And China has a real opportunity to help lead the world in a deep multilateral system. And China's really good at systems, really good at bureaucracy, but in the positive, rational sense. To say we have a system to protect biodiversity, China's done some very important initiatives on geographic redlining to protect endangered regions. And this could be institutionalized globally. The third area that I would point out, and it's really the one that triggered a xenophobic reaction in the United States, is the advanced technologies around artificial intelligence and digital, for example, 5G and Huawei. And the problem here is that we're in the midst of a dramatic technological revolution that could be of wonderful benefit for humanity, but we have no rules of the game around it right now. It's a kind of lawless environment, and we don't even know what kind of surveillance is really being done. We don't know how data are really being used. I have no idea what Google, Apple, Facebook, and so on does with my personal data, but I don't like that I don't know. And I'll finish in just a moment. Yeah, sorry to run on, but just to say, this is what triggered the heated response from the US, was the sense that China had caught up and was getting ahead in a militarily highly relevant technology of machine learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, 5G, China's ahead, and so on. And that is really what triggered the, I would say, a paranoid and racist and evangelical crusader response. But it was this sense of China made in 2025. Oh my God, they're ahead of us. What are we going to do? But not on a commercial basis per se, but on a security basis. So it's a sense of vulnerability. But the truth is, we don't have rules of the game right now. And we need to put artificial intelligence and autonomous battlefields and all sorts of other horribly threatening cyber warfare technologies under diplomatic negotiating frameworks, as we did with nuclear weapons, not perfectly, but at least, for God's sake, we got them under some kind of legal regimen so that we reduce the chance of us blowing ourselves up. Well, cyber warfare and all that comes with it is incredibly dangerous, and we need rules of the game to move forward. Let me just end by saying one basic point. This session today, I very much value it. I'm sorry to have run on too long, but I'm really grateful there are 400 participants from all over the world participating. We need to figure out how to have this kind of dialogue in a rich and deep way. The biggest risk is people who know nothing having power, because when they do, they can blow us all up. And when we have the connections, the knowledge, the in-depth discussions, the institutional and cultural connections, we will not only survive, we will thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, for that really interesting presentation, very thought-provoking and useful observations again. So it's now for me to call on Professor Zhang for 5 minutes to respond to what Professor Sachs has said.
Yeah, yes, thank you for this very thought-provoking presentation, which I agree almost 100%. And when we look at this history of Cold War, indeed, a country like United States and China have every reason, being the major powers in the world, to at least, get on well with each other for common interests of mankind. And so I think, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, you mentioned this idea of what we call ecological civilization. You mentioned this sustainable development, renewable energy. In the case of China, we have no problem whatsoever because we use the term ecological civilization. And over the past 5 years, China has indeed devoted itself to change a lot of old policies. And I give an example. In Shanghai, for instance, we have 800 rivers. Every river, every section of river, there'll be someone responsible for its cleanness. And each one, you can, with the APP on your smartphone, you can check the quality of the water. So there is a tremendous change for the better in China's internal, whatever climate conditions. But of course, we think this is for mankind as well. So I'm glad you mentioned this China commitment to carbon neutral for the year 2060. You mentioned another example of this cooperation, the rules governing AI, the digital revolution. I think this is also another area. When we look at this whole history of big powers, during the Cold War, the old Cold War, China and the United States were somehow sharing this geopolitical purpose to check the Soviet expansionism. And then when this element was out, we came with this idea of economic exchanges, booming trade. So economic relations became the really foundation of our bilateral relations. It seems there is always a need, something substantial in bilateral relations between the two major powers. So the next foundation could be, sustainable development, renewable energies, green technologies, if Mr. Biden comes to power. If Donald Trump is still in power, I don't know, perhaps things will get worse before they get better. So that's my brief comment on your wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Zhang, for keeping to time there. So, Professor Sachs, if you'd like to respond to Professor Zhang's presentation and his latest comments.
I won't over-abuse my time because I already spoke very long, so I think we could go to the discussion. Just to say, some of the people in the chat think that I'm exaggerating about Trump because the U.S. is just evil to the core. I disagree with that. And I have not been a lover of U.S. foreign policy in general for a long time. People could look at my book in 2019 called A New Foreign Policy Beyond American Exceptionalism. It was not about Trump. It was about American foreign policy. But there is something different here. Some other people took exception to my saying that Trump was the worst president because they said presidents during slavery were worse. I don't want to argue the point. Let's just say that Trump is the worst president in modern history. And it makes a difference because in the US system, the word emergency appears in so many parts of legislation. Executive decrees are the basic mechanism of governing. One should understand that almost everything that Trump has done, other than a tax cut for the rich, which I despise, has been done through executive order rather than through legislative backing. So please, for all that I also disagree with the U.S., there's more hope, and it does make a difference who's president.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we'll move on to the questions. We obviously have a very lively discussion going on chat. We also have a lot of contributions in the Q&A. It's quite difficult to know what to select, but I think that there are a couple of themes that maybe we can go into in a bit more detail. And there's a question here, and perhaps you might feel that it's been answered, but anyway, I'll put it and then you can judge. What is the US rationale for pursuing a Cold War? And to what extent are there more level-headed forces in US political circles that would adopt a more collaborative approach? So that's not just asking about the election itself, but it's this question about whether there are different forces actually within US political circles that perhaps can be engaged with. And I think we can have a Chinese point of view. Professor Zhang can perhaps talk about whether there are some sections of the US establishment that are worth talking to more than others. Can I start, though, with Professor Sachs? Is there anything else that you want to add to what you've said?
Yes, there certainly is a very strong contingent of American academic leadership and policy leadership that believes in multilateralism. And I believe that in its finest moments, the United States contributed extremely importantly to multilateralism. I think on this 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we should remember that America's greatest ever president, Franklin Roosevelt, was the political mover and in many ways the political intellectual father of the United Nations as a concept and as a reality. And I believe that the UN Charter and its moral charter, the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, which Eleanor Roosevelt did more than any other person to bring to reality, are the two great foundations of multilateralism. There are many people, including myself, that are deeply steeped in that multilateralism. I have spent the last 20 years nonstop working for and with the United Nations and believe profoundly in the UN as a system for peace and for sustainable development and for human rights, and believe on its 75th anniversary, we should rededicate ourselves, especially this generation, to those purposes. So this is why I say this is not beyond hope. It's on the contrary, there is a great part of American intellectual life which sees multilateralism as its core principle. And many of us have fought from the Vietnam War to the wars of the Middle East wholeheartedly and vociferously within our own country, and will continue to champion the UN Charter as the framework for preserving peace. And so I just want to be very clear about that. It's far from hopeless. It is a practical challenge. Some people have been writing in the chat room that I'm being stupid because it's all the U.S. military industrial complex and so on, or I'm somehow belittling listeners by making it over personalistic. I'm not. I've been involved in these issues for 40 years and as a U.S. Citizen for a lot longer than that. I am not oversimplifying, and it's not so simple as the U.S. military industrial complex. It's not so simple as Trump. It is a struggle at all times in changing circumstances to try to hone to a sane, smart, objective course. And that's what we need to do in a new context in 2020.
Thank you very much. We want to hear what you have to say, and we support you speaking out. I just want to make that clear. Professor Zhang, on that question?
For China, China is a staunch supporter of the United Nations system, its charter, and multilateralism. Indeed, China itself is a major beneficiary of multilateralism, and China can also contribute a lot to multilateralism, to the UN system. And I remember just now this question concerning the US anxiety and how to explain this. I share with Professor Sachs' view that the US is used to being the number one for so many decades. Now, I know there is a top secret in the United States. United States may become number two for all kinds of reasons. No one can discuss this. But my good friend, Singaporean senior scholar, Professor Mahbubani, gave a lecture at Harvard. He said the United States should be ready to become number two. And then he gave a rationale. He said, actually, it's nothing to worry about, because over the past 2,000 years, China was the number one, the largest economic power for roughly 1,800 years. So the US became the number one, the largest power, was an aberration, and China was a normalcy. That's his rationale. Indeed, I think, whether which country is bigger in size of economy, in technology, China is much more open-minded on that. If we can follow this idea of win-win cooperation and mutually beneficial, if we all commit to the UN rules, and we have perhaps even design new rules for the new frontier. If the Chinese society, I think if the two countries, China and the United States, can both move in the direction of mutual understanding and cooperation, it will be a tremendous plus for world peace and common prosperity. So that's my brief comment.
Thank you very much. Now, we've had quite a lot of questions and points in the Q&A about the danger of a hot war. So we have a question here. Is there a danger of Cold War escalating into a hot war? And that was a question that's come from Australia. So, Professor Sachs?
There's always a danger of a hot war. And this is the most important thing to realize. Events can get out of control. We're living in a complex environment with complex systems, where the systems themselves are so complex they're sometimes not understood. The issues do not necessarily come down to decisions by leaders. Terrible blunders, mistakes, accidents can happen. And that's why we have to tone down the rhetoric and tone up the institutionalization of cooperation at all levels. The world came within a second or two of destruction in October 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was one naval officer countermanding the order of another captain of a Soviet submarine that stopped the launch of a 15-kiloton nuclear torpedo that most likely would have set off complete global destruction. Neither Kennedy nor Khrushchev wanted that destruction. They were trying to back off, but actions taken through a series of accidents in the Caribbean, in anti-submarine and submarine warfare by local naval personnel who were not obeying orders, nearly set off thermonuclear war. Everybody should study this reality to understand it. We don't want to live by a tripwire. There are thousands of nuclear warheads, and between China and the United States, we can destroy everything. And these are not fully controlled, rational systems where you can breathe and sleep easily. These are systems that need de-escalation and control. So when you have someone as stupid as Trump, and he is stupid, and he's dangerous, and he's loudmouthed, and he's ignorant, it makes a difference, believe me, because it triggers all sorts of behavior all through bureaucracies, through the public, and so on. And don't misunderstand, that's why this is not a game. That's why Cold Wars are not cold necessarily, even if the leaders want them to be just rhetorical. Terrible things can happen. And so we shouldn't be playing around with this. And the point is that for relations as complex as the issues we're talking about right now on connectivity, online battlefields, autonomous weapons, cyber warfare, plus all of the other issues of a pandemic and all the rest, we need deep institutionalized engagement between countries, not rattling, not tweets and not even, trying to round up allies. It's so stupid what Pompeo is doing right now, traveling around Asia, trying to create an anti-China front. This is mind-bogglingly stupid. We need to talk to each other in detail about the realities that we're facing right now, and please to understand that things can escalate even when no one wants them to escalate. That's the whole history of the last century and a half, how accidents can happen and how things can get out of hand.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Professor Zhang?
Yeah, I share Professor Sachs' view on that. And indeed, this particular time, in a way, it's dangerous. We should guard against any war provocations. And actually, from our point of view, from Chinese point of view, perhaps it's first of all a major problem of the United States system. I remember Jimmy Carter, former US president, said openly, he said, over the past 240 years, the United States was without war for only 16 years. So the United States spent too many resources on war, and Afghan war, Iraqi war already cost US $3 trillion and more. And he said, in contrast, China devoted all these resources to infrastructure, to development. So that makes all the difference between China and the United States. So this is a clear message, and we should really convince US leadership that trigger happy, or this is not the right approach. At the same time, we need all kinds of institutional arrangement, including certain arrangement which we are familiar with, which left over from the Cold War between United States and the Soviet Union. Some kind of disarmament approach, some kind of institutional early warning system, with the modern technology, that will be easy, So long as there is political commitment, both sides, three sides, multilateral approach to really de-escalate tensions wherever it is.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments, both of you, on that really important question that's very much in people's minds. I think I'll move on to another area that that we haven't really talked so much about, which is on the global economy. And there are a couple of questions here. What are the implications of the new Cold War on the global economy and the role of the US and China within it? And another one on decoupling. Is economic, scientific and technological decoupling a serious possibility? And what would the consequences be? So what are your views on the future for the global economy and the role of the US and China within it, changing or otherwise, and this question of decoupling? So can I come to you now first, Professor Zhang?
I think this idea of economic decoupling between United States and China may happen in a limited way because it's against the basic logic of the market force. If you look at the situation in China now, in fact, the more US investment come in, more US companies come in. For one thing, China has really done a good job in controlling the pandemic. It's a full economic recovery and investors see the opportunities. However, if there is a new Cold War, although I think it's difficult to really realize this kind of new Cold War, if it's really launched and with the support with US allies, if that really happens, it will indeed hurt the global economy. And for one thing, it will waste a lot of resources. Mainly, they could have been used for development, for prosperity. It will be diverted to military expansion, military buildup, which would be a waste of resources, waste of money. And on the whole, the major difficulty with this Cold War approach to China is we don't buy this. We're not Soviet Union. The United States wants, some hawks want to launch a Cold War against China. China said, we will not accept it. You want to build a bloc, we will not build a bloc. You want to decoupling with China, we want to continue to embrace globalization, multilateralism. So this economic logic may play a greater role in terms of promoting further kind of integration, economic integration. Maybe it will happen it's understandable at a certain level. For instance, some countries prefer to have a more local production for some basic goods, masks, whatever. So this is understandable. But this overall chain of production, chain of supply line may continue with some adjustment. So on this, I'm slightly optimistic. For the tech war, it's already happening. I hope it will be overcome. In the coming years. But if it's not overcome, it's still tech war. I'm slightly, positive on that, because today, of course, the United States is very powerful in many technologies, but China is also very strong in many other technologies. So ideally, they can cooperate with each other. Otherwise, there might be two systems for many things. Just like, US has a GPS, we have Beidou, and you have this Android, and we have now this Huawei's Harmony. So there'll be two systems, and then it will be divided in the world. But as far as the Chinese approach is concerned, even we build this new system, we try to make them also adaptable to whatever the American system as well. So we try to embrace this idea of one global community whether in terms of technology, in terms of economic development. We have this indeed very broad mind. We believe in shared future for mankind.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs.
I think this issue of decoupling is probably most relevant in the digital area, all of the relevant digital technologies, whether it's connectivity, computation, artificial intelligence, and so on. And so we should perhaps focus on that for a moment. First, the value of having global standards in the digital area is proved over the last 50 years. By having global standards, we've greatly accelerated the technological progress and the interoperability, the connectivity, the economies of scale and scope of the digital era. So the idea of creating a decoupled digital world of different camps or lack of interoperability would be an extremely high cost mistake. Now, we don't have obviously full connectivity because lots of applications are blocked within China. Lots of applications are increasingly blocked within the United States. And therefore, when the US now advances further attempts to impede China's access to advanced microprocessor chips, for example, there's a kind of fertile ground on which that's taking place. I'm against it because I think it is dangerous, invidious, not by any means the appropriate response to the circumstances, but and mainly I don't want to see our most important sphere of technological advance that can do so much to improve humankind, save the environment, help on health and education and governance and countless other areas, become militarized, divided, and subject to a very divisive Cold War mentality. Now, having said that, we are going to enter more industrial policy by region, almost surely, because every major region will want capacity in various technologies that are near the cutting edge. And so China has industrial policies, the US has industrial policies, Europe will have industrial policies, and that will be part of the lay of the land in this fast-changing digital process. But we ought to have guardrails, understanding, updated rules of the game within the WTO on this new, dramatically dynamic and disruptive area of economic activity. This is the second point that I would say. Yes, there will be industrial policy of major regions. I have no doubt about it. But let's have it under the rules so that we don't lose the benefits of global standards and global interoperability and global connectedness. Then finally, on the issue of blocks, to a huge extent, China needs to be very proactive in preventing this also. Now, again, despite what some people are saying in the chat room about my naivete, you're open to your claims, but I think there will be a big difference with Trump out of office. Of course, I'm going to be engaged in my own struggles in that case to help make a more progressive and multilateral view within any administration that comes to power, because nothing's simple, ever. We will have fights ahead and arguments ahead. But in any event, Trump actually made a lot of progress in getting other countries to buy into this U.S. hard line. Just yesterday, Italy, of all countries, part of the Belt and Road Initiative, said we're not going to have Huawei in the system. And there are many reasons for this. These countries are dependent on the U.S. militarily. They're afraid of the U.S. But they also need more assurance from China. A lot of China's neighbors are just afraid merely of the fact that China's a giant compared to the neighbors. And so there is a sense, my God, where is our security? And so China as a giant, as a superpower, needs also to build constantly that confidence of other countries as well. It goes with the territory. And I think I'm a big believer, for example, in RCEP, RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is currently 15 countries, the 10 ASEAN countries, plus China, Japan, Korea, plus Australia, New Zealand. I think China should very proactively promote RCEP as a diplomatic venture to build confidence within the Asia-Pacific region, because China needs to build confidence also. It's a powerhouse, irrespective of the US. Put aside the whole US question, just China's relations with other countries. China needs to build that kind of confidence. So I think that this will be an ongoing issue, but the bottom line is decoupling is possible, but profoundly unadvisable. And we need to, therefore, establish proper rules for a new technological age, which is not the rules of WTO 1994.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, we have so many questions. I do want to give our two speakers the opportunity to make some concluding remarks. So what I'll do is I'll just mention a few of the other questions that have been sent in, and then I'll invite each to give their final remarks. So we've talked a bit about the US presidential election. What is the significance of the US presidential election for US-China relations? And what do US and Chinese governments need to do in order to reverse the drive towards confrontation? Perhaps we've covered these, but maybe you might want to say more. And there's a question on the pandemic. To what extent has the pandemic affected US-China relations? And there's an interesting one as well. In what ways is the rest of the world affected by deteriorating US-China relations? And what role can other countries play in helping to improve the situation? That's a question from the Philippines, interestingly. So please, our two speakers, if you wish to respond to any other points that have been raised during the course of the discussion, or you want to address any of those questions, or you just want to make some final comments, can I ask you to do so? So can we go with Professor Sachs, please, first?
Great. Well, first to say thank you for a wonderful discussion and for organizing this, and for participants from all over the world. I'm most appreciative. We need to end the pandemic urgently. China has shown that you can suppress the pandemic successfully. Other countries in the Asia Pacific similarly have shown this is possible. The US, Europe, and Latin America need really to